All right, finally, I want to talk about this issue of flattening the curve. And I don't actually mean the virus curve. I mean the decidedly less interesting curve, but nonetheless more important, well, as important curve, which is the debt curve. You know, to date, the Australian government is looking to incur more than $250 billion in costs on its economic support package. That's 13.3% of Australia's GDP. That appears to be the highest in the world. It is more than double that of Canada, for example. It is triple that of the UK. And the measures being adopted are frankly profligate. I mean, you look at a casual on $200 a week before coronavirus, they're now merrily earning $750 a week, thanks to the government. And the not-for-profit, who posts an income of a mere 15% less than this same month last year, is entitled to oodles of government money with no sense of their cash reserves, no sense of how they've been doing in the other months, no sense of whether they even need it, whether maybe something happened in the same month last year that explains the 15% difference and it's perfectly normal and fine. We're deliberately, it seems to me, overspending and free-falling into debt. And gross government debt is currently about 40% of GDP. The IMF is projecting that we will double that in just 24 months, which is quite astounding. Now the cry comes back, of course, well, what are we to do? You know, we need to be saved from the virus. And I just have a question. I'm not saying do nothing, I really am not. But I do have a question, which is, at what point does the cure become worse than the disease? Business leaders have become openly critical about the approach to the economy. Australian Industry Group executive Innes Willox has said parochial state premiers are trying to outdo, outbid and outrace each other to smother any chance of economic recovery. Our responses to the health situation must be proportionate and logical, not hysterical and irrational. And he's saying basically this complete lockdown stuff is really doing more harm than we realise. And I think he does make a valid point. Could it be that we lose perspective? Let me put it this way. If the media posted tables on the front pages which not only kept up their obsessive focus on the number of new coronavirus cases each day, but let's say they posted tallies of the number of people who have filed for bankruptcy in the last 24 hours, the number of people who have applied for Centrelink in the last 24 hours, the number of businesses that have gone into administration in the last 24 hours, the number of people who have lost their job in the last 24 hours or had their hours reduced to nearly zero, the number of addictions revived in people's lives due to isolation, the number of suicides and things like this. Maybe then we'd have a slightly better view of what's really happening, maybe a more sober view of the costs that are incurred, not just in the health system, not just in infection rates, but everywhere. But see, there's a very modern idea which we've all come to believe. And it's this, it's that the government will and can and should save us. We believe that the government can save us from everything, even climate change, even bushfires, and now it can save us from another incident of life, which is disease, pandemics and things like that. We look to the government and say, save us, make sure this doesn't happen. It's unrealistic. This is why I think some of the criticism of Daniel Andrews is really over-egged. I mean, he is my least favourite politician in the country, or least favourite leader in the country, by far. But gee, yeah, maybe mistakes were made. Mistakes were always going to be made. You cannot control every microscopic virus that's floating around in this country right now, and however many trillions of them there are. It's unrealistic. We believe that the government can save us, and we punish governments who we don't think are trying hard enough and being earnest enough in saving us, in tipping money, out like I was just describing it in these crazy measures that are being put together. And so they're forced to act quickly, even when their actions are poorly calculated and can't be known, they can't have proper information to make the decisions. And so the government comes in as a saviour. The economic shutdown is to save us from the virus. But then all of a sudden we realise we need to be saved from the economic shutdown. And so it's raining money and stimulus. And my question is this, what if they can't save us? What if we're delaying the inevitable? Or what if actually they could save us? They can save us from this particular matter, which is the spread of a virus. But you know what? Only by creating problems that are far worse, far more systemic, and far more destructive down the line. I already mentioned the immediate debt issue, but there's a bigger issue. In Australia, the immediate debt issue is not that big of a deal, frankly, in its absolute number, 40% of GDP. All right, we're better than most Western countries. That's the reply you will get so far. But it's the trend that bothers me. It's where all this is headed. The 2008 global financial crisis struck, and Australia had uniquely posted a decade of budget surpluses, resulting in the repayment of all government debt. And the West responded, though, all Western countries responded to the GFC in nearly the same way. And it's called the Keynesian approach. When the economy's on the slide, it means not enough people are spending money or investing in things, and so the government steps in, again, the saviour, saves us from our own lost confidence by spending up big on lots and lots and lots of stuff. And Prime Minister Kevin Rudd gave nearly every Australian $800 in cash. I was at the uni at the time, so I got about $2,000 in cash, which I thought was great fun. But then the government embarked also on a massive array of nation-building projects, not all of which were successful, think Pink Bat, school halls, etc. But basically it was raining money. And you know something? The coalition went mental. Many of us were quite taken aback, actually, because this seemed to be an insane act of economic vandalism to plunge Australia into more debt than the GFC would at breakneck speed when the future was uncertain, the size of the required stimulus totally unknowable, and the likelihood of ever repaying this money slim because people don't like it when you turn the tap off when you've been giving them cash. And so governments don't tend to have the moral courage to do it. And so, this debt could be a permanent problem. And we'd seen the rest of the world suffering with major debt issues and debt crises. And we're saying, well, isn't this what makes Australia different? That we don't do what they're doing, that we don't go down this line? And the coalition, carped on and on with the same economic message until they won the 2013 election. Well, here are two fun facts. Of the main contributors to the Australian government's gross debt from 1854 to 2020, that whole span of time, the Rudd-Gillard governments of the post-GFC period contributed a massive 37.5% of the total figure. Big. Coalition governments since 2013 have contributed more than 52%. The Rudd government ended up spending, in today's dollars, about $2,900 for every Australian on stimulus measures post-GFC. The Morrison government is on track to spend about $8,000 for every Australian on coronavirus measures. Here is a big change in the past decade or two. Conservative governments across the West have almost entirely given away their fiscal discipline credentials. And you say, well, so what does it mean? Two things. Firstly, the trend really needs to stop. The Keynesian approach is all very well, but as I said, we simply don't know how close together crises are. We don't know how much money we need, how secure we need to be, and how big the next thing is going to be, and how soon it's going to be. We don't know how deep the crisis is when we're in it until we're out the other side. It seems to me that money was just thrown at this thing like mad and too much in so many ways, but quickly, not knowing how long it will last. What if we've overdone it and we need to survive a lot longer? What if, all sorts of things come to mind? We don't know how much to spend. We don't know what the future holds. It's an impossible theory in practice. I remember talking to an economics lecturer at uni and saying exactly that. Great theory, doesn't work. Not least of which because actually governments, once they are zealous and they want to be seen to be doing good and they plunge us into this huge surge of debt, then the crisis passes. Nobody will tolerate austerity and cutbacks. Nobody. And the opposition will always put the government's feet to the fire every time they want to take a dollar off of anything. So the spending never really dries up. And then the next crisis hits. We never had a budget surplus since 2008. Not one. It was supposed to happen this year, but it isn't happening now. And the surge is back on, back into more debt. The trend is bad. Which leads me to my second point. This problem is intergenerational. Large sections of the current generation probably won't fully have to deal with this issue because this is a trend that will come home to roost in the future. It is young people who will face the full brunt of unrepayable debt, flat economic growth, minimal superannuation, lower living standards than their parents, trouble with interest rates, inflation, and languishing investment. It's funny because actually I'd say that's probably the demographic that'd be least interested in this topic and yet will certainly be most affected by it. It's already the case that many young people, and surveys indicate this, don't have confidence that the future is secure. There's no hope in the system. And that's not for no reason. Some of the reasons for that are wrong, but some of them are actually okay. They're not bad. because some are valid and this is one. And the long-term integrity of the system looks to many flaky. And it's affecting the psychology of young people, their approach to life. Gone are the days when hard work, a mortgage and 600 square metres of land held a nearly certain promise of a secure life. It just doesn't look like this system is going to give back in the same way. It's accelerating the youth's slide into ideologies that say the system is broken and that there's nothing in it for them. And that's a trajectory that I'm concerned about in my generation, but it's actually the actions of all generations that are in some ways making it worse. And if this path continues, the Marxists will almost certainly have their way, because it'll be a case of, and that loss of confidence in the system will lead to the kind of destruction that they seek. And so this goes back to my original point, which is, okay, even if the government does save us from the pain of crises like this, what's the long-term cost? Where does it all end? Where does it end up? Are we simply undermining the integrity of the system itself? Now, it won't happen today, this problem, but I'm calling it early because the trend is ever clearer. As Nietzsche said, lightning and thunder require time, the light of the stars requires time, deeds, though done, still require time to be seen and heard. So it's not going to happen today, but it's on the way. And this is not a question of doing nothing, but it's a question of balance. And my point is this: I think the mindset today, which is to expect too much from the government, which is to be terrified of hardship, which sometimes simply has to come, and which is to be stuck in this Keynesian approach to economic crisis, to spend up big and fast, it all leaves us getting that balance frequently wrong. But like Joseph, wise rulers store up for the future. And it's my hope that a new generation will care about this once again because of where it all ends. Wise leaders do store up. Joseph did. But the foolish squander. And the thing is, both approaches yield their own fruits in their time. I'm Mark Niles, and that was the truth of it. Hey, one more thing. I've been looking at the metrics and I figured out something. You guys are watching the videos and not subscribing. So please help us out a great deal by hitting the like button and then hitting subscribe, hitting the bell as well so you get the notifications. It helps us out a really great deal, and you can click here to see more videos.